now go to the big man of the day, AI. I call AI the big man of the day. And we're going to have Margaret John telling us all about how we can use it in education. Margaret John is a data scientist in Chicago, and she holds a master's degree in applied mathematics from the University of Illinois at Chicago. She particularly enjoyed her in teaching assistant and her experience teaching
TAship.
calculus from all levels. Her field of study was differential equations, which she now uses to help develop novel cancer detection techniques. So over to you, Margaret John.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. Can everybody see my screen? I think so. During this presentation, feel free to ask questions during it. I'll try to keep an eye on the Q&A chat. But as she said, yes, my name is Margaret John. I am a data scientist in Chicago, and I will be talking to you guys about GAI in education. Today we'll talk about GAI in education. Now, you may or may not have heard the term GAI before, but GAI refers to not just the common AI tools that you've heard, but also a whole host of other ones. And we'll get into that as a first topic. Next, we'll talk about some capabilities and limitations of AI in education. We'll talk about some AI content detection tools. So how can you see if your students have been using AI in their work? And finally, we'll wrap up with a demo if my computer cooperates. So what is GAI? GAI refers to generative AI, which is any kind of AI model that can generate content. Previously, we've had AI models that can answer yes or no questions or tell you whether a picture is of a dog or a cat. But now we have tools that can answer open-ended questions, that can write essays, that can develop theses, and do all sorts of crazy things. So let's first start a discussion with a couple examples of GAI writing tools. I'm sure you guys have already heard of ChatGPT. It is an AI-powered chatbot. So you type responses to it, and it will write responses back to you. It's free to use for everyone. So there's a free version. All you need to do is give them your email and phone number, and they give you an account. Although there is a paid level, which is supposed to be much smarter and more intelligent. In addition to ChatGPT, there's a ton of others as well, including Grammarly, which is specifically for writing. So it is trained to improve your writing skills. Finally, there's GitHub Copilot, which is specifically for coding. So it'll integrate with your coding environment and either write code for you or help you improve what code you're writing. What's important to pay attention to with every tool is what data was used to generate the model. So ChatGPT used parts of the internet, so it's going to have a whole lot of information. It's going to be absolutely massive. It was only possible with a large amount of computing power donated by Microsoft, so gigantic companies, gigantic computers. While something like Grammarly will be trained on a much smaller data set, still absolutely massive. But it is fine-tuned for a specific purpose, and for Grammarly, that purpose is English. Similarly, for GitHub Copilot, that specific purpose is coding. So there's different types, different flavors of GAI tools. So what can they do? They can answer open-ended questions, give feedback, fix errors, even their own. ChatGPT has been able to pass the bar exam, the US medical licensing exam, and one of the ways to compare the different versions of ChatGPT is to see how easily it passes a benchmark set of exams. So it is very good at those things. It can be a great place to research a new topic, generate early drafts or papers, or interrogate ideas. But the key skill needed when using generative AI tools is critical thinking. And this brings me to its limitations. Generative AI will never replace human logic, and none of the answers you get out of generative AI are guaranteed to be correct. They can only use information in their training sets, but even the way they use that information is not in a directly logical way. It's much more about the frequency of how words come together in their training set than the actual information contained in their training set. And an understanding of how it's wrong, why it's wrong, or even why it's correct is a very open field of study in AI. When generative AI is incorrect, people often call it hallucinations because its output will sound very correct, but the information will be very wrong. For example, one of the examples I came across was if you asked Bard how many N's there are in banana, it will say there is one N in banana. That's an easy way of, that's something that we can easily verify, but it will be just as confident in a wrong answer as it is with the right answer. And that's something you need to always keep in mind when interacting with generative AI. Now, regardless of its limitations, it is an important tool. It's something that people are using every day. I use it every day in my own work. And there are very good ways to introduce students to it in the classroom. For example, you can have students use ChatGPT to write an argument, but then have students critique that argument in their own words. You could have them use it to generate outline for, say, a paper or an assignment, and then write the rest of the assignment in their own words. Or have students construct an argument and conversely have ChatGPT critique that argument and have them respond to that critique. Regardless of what you do, it's always important to keep in mind when using generative AI in the classroom that students should all have access to the same tools. So as I said before, there's a host of generative AI tools. Each of them will have a slightly different flavor or answer. And it's important that, if you're going to be using Grammarly Go or something like that, that all students have access to the same thing. Next, it's important to make it very clear what is the appropriate use of the tool and what's an inappropriate use of the tool. And finally, it's also important to make sure that no information you want to keep private is ever given to an AI tool. This has much more bearing in the corporate world where you don't want any proprietary information leaking out, but anything you give to an AI tool is saved forever by that company because that information is useful to them. Now, if students are going to use it as a tool, there are going to be some that will abuse it as a tool. So it's important for educators to have an understanding of how to appropriately integrate and appropriately set boundaries on the tool. So when it is impossible or overly difficult to remove access to the internet during an assignment, I'd recommend that you start by explicitly stating the appropriate use of a generative AI tool. Is it okay to write a first draft? Is it okay to use it to make edits or get critiques? And next, it's important to instruct students to save their own paper trails. So with generative AI, it's not often clear when students have used or abused it. And probably the worst way they could use it is if they type the assignment into ChatGPT and copy and paste the answer. Now, one of the only and best ways to make sure they don't do that is if they keep their own evolution of their work. Now, this is useful to them to see how their editing history goes, but it's also very important for instructors because even the best AI detection tools aren't going to be 100% accurate. The only thing you can really trust is document evolution histories to see that students have been putting their best work on into their assignments. And finally, use AI detection tools appropriately. Certainly use them to get a feel for, as kind of a filter to see which students' work looks a little suspicious, but don't rely on them entirely because they can be definitely fooled in both directions, as in AI detection tools can flag human work as AI and flag some AI work as human. So it's important when you use them to think about the student as a whole, their assignment history, and again, ask for these paper trails to ensure that they're doing their own work. So as there are as many AI detection tools as there are AI tools, and I have a few outlined here. GPT-0 is probably my favorite because it's free and it has a document upload feature. So you can just batch load all of your students' assignments and get a score for each one. However, I've also found it doesn't always work as well. Originality AI, made by Google, it's the paid version of GPT-0 and can perform better. Content at scale is also free, but you have to manually copy paste your students' work, which can be time consuming. And copy leaks is similar as well. So let's go and
not to interrupt, but we have a participant saying that she's having difficulty hearing the presenter. So if there's anything that the presenter can do to increase her volume, we'd appreciate it. I mean, it's just one person, but we would like everybody to hear because it's such valuable information. Thanks.
Let's see. Probably since my headphones, I'm gonna disconnect them real quick. Is that better? Oops. All right, can the listeners hear me?
Yes.
Okay, lovely.
One of the participants was asking if you can return to the previous slide because she missed it. He or she missed it.
Apologies. This one or?
I would think so.
Okay, good. Yes. So yes, here are 4 tools and they're also readily accessible if you just search for AI content detection. These are the top ones. I see we have some raised hands. I wouldn't mind taking some questions now.
So Paulette Rifa, if you wish, go ahead. Okay, I'm not too sure what's happening.
That's okay.
So I guess we could continue. Oh, right. Okay, the person is about to speak. Sorry about that.
Sorry, I was saying that was accidental. I don't have a question.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry. All right, so moving into GPT-0. GPT-0 boasts an accuracy rate exceeding 78%, which is kind of high, but it's also not, it's certainly not 100%. So again, rely on external validation, such as version histories or handwritten notes to actually determine whether your students are overutilizing AI sources. Another thing to keep in mind with GPT-0 is that shorter writing samples from children or in other styles, or samples written in languages other than English have a higher chance of being misclassified. So longer writing samples and more complex writing samples are all much better at being correctly classified. So how can we externally verify? One of the ways is to check the version history of a document. If your students are using Microsoft Word or Google Docs, you can just go to File Version History or File Info Version History and see you can see a little log of every single change they made to that document. And the thing to look for is really large pasted segments. And if you see a large pasted segment, it likely means that they have plagiarized. Obviously, not entirely. They could have pasted from another document that they own, but large pasted segments likely means that they have been plagiarizing. So when you can, try remove access from the internet for assessments. And then when you can't, use AI content detection tools or rely on document history to see if your students have been overutilizing AI sources. But all in all, it's important to focus on the process more than the product of what your students are making. ChatGPT and other AI content or other generative AI tools aren't going away. They're being heavily utilized in the industry now. So it's much better that your students learn how to integrate them into their learning strategy than to completely be independent of them. And finally, give me 1 second and we will run through a quick demo of ChatGPT and some AI detection tools. Okay, so OpenAI is right here in chat.openai.com. And here I have a query that I set up a couple days ago. So I can ask it open-ended questions such as, how can I use your tool in the classroom? And it gives me a pretty long and somewhat well thought out response. It can research topics, it can explain concepts and help you with writing and language learning. Some of them are a little stranger than others. As a virtual guest speaker, I'm not sure how useful this would be. But it is quick, it's responsive, and it's highly informative as well. Now, let's see how good a couple of these AI content detection tools are at detecting AI content. We talked earlier about GPT-0. So they have moved some things around. They really made this interesting. Anyway, so here's the paste your text here. What they have outlined here are different tools that you can use for integrating this more seamlessly into your grading workflow. But we'll use this plugin here. And we just take the AI written content. And we can see that this simple query, which is just about 3,000 characters, gets a score of 53% from GPT-0. This means that GPT-0 has answered essentially, I don't know, whether this is human or AI. So as you can see, this very straightforward example, this AI content detection tool is unsuccessful at determining the source. Now let's look at some other ones. Okay, so for all of these, that GPT-0, this content at scale, you should make an account, but they're also just free to use independently as well. So I highly doubt you want to be copying and pasting all your students' work in this way. So content at scale gave this a 1% human probability, so highly likely to be AI generated. This means that content at scale was successful at determining that this is an AI generated piece of work. So this concludes the bulk of the discussion. I'd like to reiterate that GPT and other generative AI tools have fantastic capabilities, but will take some time for us to learn how to use appropriately. They allow students to gain access to information quickly and easily, but are not always guaranteed to be correct. I would say consider incorporating them directly into your assignments rather than ignoring them altogether, and consider using AI content detection tools to ensure that students are not tempted to plagiarize from human or AI sources. I have some further reading here in these slides if you guys are interested, but thank you for listening to my talk, and I'd like to take some questions.
Thanks so very much. What you call your talk. We enjoyed the presentation. I'm sure most people were glued because everybody wants to know not only what is AI, but where is AI going and how we are going to use it in our classrooms. And I like the presentation because you brought to us what's practical, what's impractical, and what we should be mindful of. For example, the source, the data source that we have, can we trust it? Personally, when I use Grammarly, sometimes I get so frustrated because I know definitely this is the correct thing, and here is Grammarly telling me they're underlining these little blue things and telling me that's not correct. And you know, it frustrates you because you're wondering, where am I going wrong? You know, so you explaining that we must be mindful of our data set and where it came from and who did it. So we don't have to accept it. Yes, it pops up, but we can run along with it. But I like that you really, and about misplaced confidence of AI. You know, we should be so careful how much confidence we placed in AI. And I like to the link between the previous presentations, because certainly popped into my head what it is doing, like AI versus creativity, AI versus problem solving, AI versus decision making. So we heard all those lovely skills that we are supposed to adapt, be creative, be able to solve problems. And here is AI giving you it on a silver platter. So again, it calls for mental adjustment, and it calls for you looking carefully at what you are doing, because it's like you have to look at the three sides of this coin and not just two. This coin has three sides, definitely. So we need to look at that when we are going forward in using. And you also pointed out that it's inevitable. We cannot get away from it. So we ought to understand it. I mean, I really enjoyed that presentation. And I'm sure that many people put questions for Anderson. Anderson, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Shutt. And thank you very much, Mrs. John, for your presentation this morning. Okay, so we do have a few questions for you. The first one comes from Roxana Pamphlet. And she is asking, she's making a statement that there's a global concern of AI replacing teachers in the future. So she's asking for your opinion on this at this point in time.
So teachers fill a specific role that's very much outside of the capabilities of ChatGPT. I'd say a heavily motivated learner could replace, in the same way the internet did not replace teachers, I don't believe that generative AI will replace teachers as well. I think any kind of learner who could have used the internet to replace a teacher could use GAI to replace a teacher, but the converse is not true. Does that make sense? So I'm not worried just because teachers do a lot more than GAI could ever do.
And I will just add to what you said. I mean, I think the human touch could never compensate for a computer. Am I correct?
Yes. And I mean, for better or worse, I've actually had fights with my ChatGPT before, but it is fundamentally not human.
Oh, okay. All right. So I have another question coming from Judy Wong, and she's asking, can ChatGPT, for example, be included in a bibliography of a paper or presentation?
That's a very good question. I would say yes, it's a good idea to cite that source, but as in another way, I would say you shouldn't, because the information you get from ChatGPT should only point you in a direction. If you are citing something in a bibliography, it should be the source of the information that you used, and ChatGPT should never be that. Generative AI should never be that. You can kind of think of it as a way to kind of, you give it some facts, it'll shake them up around and maybe give it to you in a better order for you to see, like rearrange the letters on your Scrabble ticket, but it shouldn't ever give you like ground truth that you move from for any of your arguments or any of your papers. So yes and no.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answers your question. So I am seeing another one here coming from Bernard Richardson. And he's asking, plagiarism and copywriting are two major issues concerned at this point in time. All right, and critical thinking is also seen as a major part of developing an individual. So how authentic, so the question is, how authentic is one's work when we use AI, seeing that they're basically using information that has been programmed or encrypted?
That's a good question. So the critical thinking is necessary when interacting with ChatGPT. I think ChatGPT is going to make it incredibly easy for people to remove critical thinking from their lives, but they should and will run into problems with it, because I mean, in my own experience with ChatGPT, I'll use it often to start projects that I don't have a large background in, but it often fails. And when it fails, you have to be able to have the outlying understanding to, you know, push it from what it all comes down to is the kind of products that ChatGPT gives you are not, they're still not as good as what a human can make. The writing style that it writes in is typically a lot more simplistic. Its arguments can be a lot more flat, even as fantastic as it is for a computer to be able to write an argument. That argument isn't the work of a human mind, in that it doesn't display fundamentally logic. So I think that it can be used by people to plagiarize and copyright and take shortcuts in their lives, but if it's used correctly, it can free up their time for better tasks. And I think it is fundamentally authentic, your work, even if you do use a tool. You need to just think of it as a tool and not as someone who's thinking for you.
And what other forms of AI can we integrate into our teaching?
Yeah, so ChatGPT is the one I'm most familiar with, but generative AI expands to images and other things as well. Not sure how I would use Photoshop AI in your classroom, but there are a couple very good examples, aside from the few here, where you can use some text-based AI like ChatGPT to kind of play off of yourself and use it almost as an automatic tutor. But yeah, that's a good question.
All right,
I
thank
think
you.
it depends on the classroom itself.
Good. So I'm just reminding all attendees, you are more than welcome to place your questions in the question and answer section, and we will try our best to answer as many as we can during the course of this morning. All right, so as we continue, a question comes from Denise, and Denise is asking, could detection of the use of AI be disabled by students? And if so, what tool could be used to counteract that?
Yes, so AI and AI detection tools are in a bit of an arms race, right? Every time the generative AI tools get better, the detection AIs have to also get better. And so it is kind of a fight. Now, I think especially with having students save a paper trail, this is the way to make the use of AI so cumbersome that it's ultimately not worth it. But there are obviously ways to circumvent it. For example, students could write their own work and then have AI improve it. And ultimately, that if the student is writing their own work, then that's most of the issue down already. The goal in honestly, it will be very difficult to remove AI tools entirely from your students' work unless you're having them do it completely online. But the goal is to have them do enough of their work.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the others are more comments in terms of your presentation. So persons are complimenting you, Mrs. John, on your presentation as well. And they are really appreciative of the work that you have shared with us this morning. All right, I am asking, I'm not seeing any other questions at this point in time. So I'm asking if anybody has any questions. Feel free and let us know at this point in time.
Anderson, we
I
have
have
a
one.
question. Sorry, Dr. Shutt, we have a
You go ahead,
question in the
yes.
Q&A from Dirk.
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'm now scrolling. Okay, good. All right, so there's another one with regards to from Dirk asking, do you have any trepidation that a programmer may make the tool become less robotic and make writing a little imperfect in the future?
Yes. So there's always, I mean, even the fact that ChatGPT is as good as it is right now is an absolute feat that nobody thought would be coming in the next, for the next 50, 60 years. And there will always be improvements, but even what I've found in using AI in my day-to-day, it's very good at certain things. And I think that we're coming to a point where we're finding out the limits of what it's very good at. I don't think that we'll be able to make an AI that completely mimics a human. We've gotten very far, frighteningly far. But even the tools that you see now are running on hyper-specialized machines that are like a couple thousand of your computers all stacked together and working in harmony. But yeah, it will improve, and maybe it will be able to replace writing, and then you guys are going to have a very difficult question to answer.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mrs. John. I'm not seeing any other questions at this point in time. So I just want to say thank you so much.
Anderson, there's one question.
The question was answered. What other forms of AI?
Okay, it was answered.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, that was answered before. All right. All right. So again, thank you very much.
Sorry, Anderson. Wahida on the Rhine has a question. What percentage? I don't think we addressed one.
I'm not seeing
If you scroll down, if you scroll right to the end of the Q&A.
Oh, okay. Apparently that was just shared. Okay. Okay, so another question.
That's
What
in the
percentage?
spirit.
Okay, so what percentage of the students' work using AI tools in their writing is acceptable?
So that's a good question, and it depends on the individual assignment, but I think that the core ideas and the core communications should always be the student's own work. Also, the responsibility for exactly what is said should be the student's own work. But personally, I would think that certain steps, such as generating a first draft of an outline. So you should be able to tell ChatGPT, this is my main argument. This is what I want to say. Can you generate an outline for me? And then moving from that outline to a fully fleshed out paragraphs using your own work, I think would be appropriate. But again, that is up to the individual teacher, not only to determine that, but also to explain to your students clearly what is appropriate and what isn't.
Okay, thank you. Checking is making sure, and thank you very much to Alicia and Freddie for giving me those other questions I may have missed. I'm looking to see if there's any others. Okay, Yvette, I'm not too sure if this question applies to the current program, which you're asking about if you have a master's program in another area. All right. Oh, okay. I just saw it. Thank you. All right. Okay. I don't think there are any others. So, and I mean, Kanisha's, your question was also answered already. So I would say thank you very much to Mrs. John, and I pass you back to Dr. Shan.
Would it be rude if I ask a question? I just wanted to ask Mrs. John one final thing about the language issue. I'm concerned about it because we live in a multicultural, multilingual world. And so, do you know what has been done to alleviate the language issues? Because people who speak one tongue and have to be degree in another language is extremely difficult. So, do you know whether or not something is being done to
Yes,
address
actually. So I know that
language
there
issues?
are versions of generative AI tools that are specifically trained to have a more diverse input set as far as language goes. So being much better at questions and answers in Spanish, and similarly detection tools as well, being better at accepting and understanding other languages as well. Although English is the most common one, there certainly are other tools, and I believe at least one of the AI content detection tools is specified for multiple languages. Yes, CopyLeaks is supports multiple languages.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I must thank you for that excellent presentation. And as expected, a presentation of this nature would generate a lot of questions, and because there's so much to ask, about it. But we have to bear in mind that we, as educators, have to be knowledgeable about what's here and what we have to use. And it also means that we also have to keep abreast of what's happening so that when students come to us with questions, we are able to guide them in the right direction if we ourselves are unable to answer. So I think that was an excellent presentation, and I really, really appreciate it. And thank you on behalf of all the participants, on behalf of CVE. Thank you, thank you, thank you.